Horror and Thriller Bootcamp Week 1. So this is going to be a four-part course that is going to take you through basically the 101 crash course and everything to do with horror and thriller writing. Both of these are similar, but still distinct in some ways, and so we have to go through all the different nuances that are going to distinguish them, and also all the stuff that is going to be the same between them as well. So I'll be kind of skipping back and forth in between the two topics to begin with, but as we go forward, we'll cover a healthy dose of both. So let's look at our overview for the class today. Also, yeah, just remember this slide. You can sign up for the bootcamp. This is going to be, you're in a free class now, but this is going to have 3 other additional parts after this. So if you plan to enroll in the class but haven't signed up yet, you can click the little check mark emoji in the chat on, let's see, where should we put that, Nacho? Let's maybe on this last message here. Nacho will have a thing for you to click on in the chat. If you want to sign up and have not yet, you can click that to get access to the chat channels early. You can start a free free trial membership on our website, scriptcamp.net/membership, which gives you access to all the classes, all the boot camps, all the activities and workshops, over 70 hours of live interactive classes a month, plus access to that video library that we mentioned. That will also get you $100 off consultations, proofreads. So check out what those different offers are here, and you can go to our website to find out more about all of these, scriptcamp.net/coverage for that. Let's look at the overview of this course. So week 1 is going to be about monsters and villains, mostly focusing on horror, how to refine a logline and find a premise that is both original and fresh and interesting within this genre. So we all know that this genre has a pretty low barrier of entry in some ways, we could say, just because it does not require huge budgets or huge stars. So there's a lot of horror and thriller movies, and so you have to find ways to, if you want to write those movies and get your work out there as a writer, not someone who's just going to write and direct or make these movies yourself. If you actually want people to be buying your scripts, then you have to have fantastic premises. And premise is going to be really, 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 really key in horror and thriller writing, because we're always looking for that interesting new spin on familiar elements that we have seen before. So we'll look at refining a logline and finding originality in a horror premise, filling out a sketchbook, which is going to be kind of a document where you're going to collect all your ideas for the horror or thriller film you're working on, and we'll also have some slides on designing a villain and different things to keep in mind between horror and thriller villains, but the kind of stuff that is going to make them really compelling, whichever genre they're in. But yeah, we'll look at the difference there. Week 2 is going to be on plot archetypes and twists, and we will look at sort of starting to structure a story beat summary for your horror or thriller feature project. This is not exactly going to be as comprehensive as a feature bootcamp, which are going to take you all the way from idea to completed draft in just 8 weeks. This is only a 4-week course, so this is going to be more something that's going to like get you on course for fully planning and outlining a horror or thriller film. Week 3 is going to be focused on scare sequences and suspenseful scenes and just what makes something suspenseful on the page. And we'll look at just the basics of crafting the thrills for this genre on a scene-by-scene level. And week 4 will be about genre expectations and tone, where we'll finish your scene cards, which is going to be that full paragraph for every scene in a theoretical feature that you've not written yet, but that's the kind of last card, that's the last step in pre-writing, is coming up with these cards, a full map of everything that's going to happen on every page of the movie, more or less. So you should be more like ready to start writing pages by June 18th, and if you want to join that feature bootcamp, then you'll have a great head start, you'll have your full outline worked out, and it'll just be a great little boost right at the beginning. So yeah, remember, scriptcamp.net. You can also just tell us in the chat if you want to sign up. You can click the little checkmark emoji next to that image in the chat, and you will be welcome to join. All right, thanks, guys. Let's look at our... Oh, and here's just a quick overview of that feature bootcamp schedule. That's going to be, if you follow this horror course, then right afterwards you transition to the feature bootcamp. It'll very smoothly transition into this, and you can just work it through all the way to the end. It's like how to write a movie 101 step by step. All right, let's look at our overview for this session today. So we'll look at some genre definitions and our distinction between horror and thriller, because this is going to be a class for people who are working on both or either, but there are just really key differences that we should be aware of. We'll look at stakes and conflict and plot types, so the main horror genres, or the sort of sub-genres as we might call them, or the subtypes of the plots perhaps, are survival, drama, and mystery. So there's certain tropes and expectations that come with each of these, and they just sort of tell you what the characters are going to be doing in each of these movies. Most horror movies will have a sort of primary type and then a sort of plot subtype as well. You can almost think of it like, Pokemon or whatever, where they have like a primary fire type and subtype poison type or whatever. I don't actually remember if Pokemon do that, but, you get the idea. You can sort of like mix and match these things to create interesting combinations. Most movies will have some combination of those three things. Sometimes one act will be more survival, one act will be more mystery, and one act will be more drama. Or there might be certain other things like comedy that are thrown in the mix that we'll talk about that as well. So we'll look at horror logic and what is scary. What is scary? The difference between something being scary just in a narrative story like that's spoken out loud. What's scary on the page, and is being scary necessarily even the point? Horror logic has to do with fantasy, ceremony, ritual, and rules. And we can break down the distinctions there, and all these different things that we sort of understand as powering the supernatural will do a lot to helping you build a convincing horror logic in your scenario. Because obviously a lot of what we're dealing with are supernatural forces, so the logic has to kind of make sense on a gut instinctual level. It doesn't actually have to really add up scientifically or mathematically, but there are certain key things that you can do to make the unreal just feel more real and feel more like that could sort of kind of happen, even if you're making it up and it's like a silly effect that you made with a monster mask and a CGI on your camera, or CGI in your editing program. You want to write something that the audience goes home and they are a little bit nervous could maybe kind of happen. And there's a delicate trick to that. That's not just as easy to do as you might think. We see a million bad horror movies go on streaming and Redbox and everything every day, and a lot of them do not exactly haunt us or continue to stick with us, but why do some and why do some not? So we'll have to break down why some horror is effective and why some just doesn't work, and the things that make it thrive in different mediums, because something that's going to be scary is going to work very differently in a novel, in a play, in a book, in a movie. So like you get the idea. There's different stuff that will scare us in different contexts, and different things are entertaining in different ways and in these different contexts. So the goal is not always be as scary as possible in every single scene, because you just can't beat that drum that hard all the time. If every scene is trying to top the last one for being the scariest scene ever, it gets sort of exhausting pretty quickly, and that's why you have to be able to learn to play these other notes in storytelling as well, so that by the time you actually get to those really scary scenes, you will have drawn the audience in and lured them into your sort of trap. Okay, so, sorry about that notification noise. All right, so what else? We'll look a little bit at The Ring today. I mean, The Ring is one of my favorite scary movies and just a fantastic script and an undeniable huge cultural phenomenon that has transcended from Japan to America and still continues to grow and be this huge force of media even today. It's a long series, if you don't know, that has existed in Japan since the 90s. So we'll look at the movie. And talk a little bit about the plot and how some things are working in it. I won't deep dive into it as much as I did in earlier versions of this class that I think were 3 hours long. But we'll at least glance at it because it's just such a great study in rules and creating fantasy that kind of just makes sense in a movie. Sorry, how do you turn off notifications on a PC? 1 second. Turn off all notifications. There we go. Okay. Okie doke. So after looking at The Ring, we'll look at Ghouls. So these are the sort of villains of the movie that we were discussing, and there's different sources of this either supernatural or mundane evil that feel like they make sense in a movie. We have emotional pain and human evil in this cold and uncaring universe. So lots of different talk about emotional metaphor, monster design, abilities, limitations, sympathy, rationality, personality, domains, and things like that just make a villain feel more real-ish. Not like they actually do exist, but like they sort of could exist.
Like the shark from Jaws?
Like the shark from Jaws, sure, exactly. That's something that is not totally impossible. It's not like a magic ghost or something, but we still have to look at how to create those characters in a clever and strategic way that serves the story we're telling.
Sorry, but are there going to be examples of You gonna tell examples of movies in this? What made them successful?
Sure. I mean, yeah, we can't always know exactly what made something successful, but we can look at what makes it an effective story and the things that, at least in our opinions, make something scary or that make it exciting.
Like
Everyone
Jaws.
has, sure, like Jaws. But yeah,
Yeah,
everyone has
absolutely.
different opinions on these things. Um,
I've been studying, trying to find out what made that movie successful. Hmm.
I see. Okay, yeah, it might be. I'm sure
But
there's whole books written about that topic that could get far more into it than we can here.
all
Uh,
right.
all right, so well, and the last thing we'll look at is death scenes and how to sort of space them out through the movie, how to pace them, and how to play them for maximum impact without overdoing anything, and all the sort of setups and payoffs that go into effective sort of horror death sequences. And last, we'll talk about this idea that will sort of be sewn throughout, but if nothing else, this principle that I talk about in terms of promises in horror writing, where if so much of storytelling is based on you setting up promises and then fulfilling them to the audience, writing horror specifically is hinging on the strategic violation of these same promises, but in ways that the audience doesn't feel like you sort of cheated. It's like a magic trick. You are kind of cheating a little bit in that you are saying you're going to give them one thing and then you give them a completely different thing. But it has to sort of all feel organic and like, oh, of course that's what he was going to give me the whole time. It shouldn't feel like we're like just blatantly lying and deceiving our audience. It should feel like we're misdirecting them so that by the time we get to the surprise, it feels natural and like, oh, of course that's the logical culmination of the twist, rather than that just came out of nowhere. So yeah, careful careful arts to making those things work. Let's get into it because we have so many topics to talk about, and only about an hour 45 to do it. So we will just dive right in. Okay, so definition. There's a lot of argument of what distinguishes horror and thriller, and I think the really just basic ground level version of this is horror movies are supposed to scare you primarily as their source of entertainment. It's a motion picture that is calculated to cause and utilize repugnance, fear, suspense, or dread for entertainment purposes, and that's like its main method of entertaining you. So you can look at any genre as a series of genre promises, and it's like this is its way that it is saying it will entertain you. A comedy is a movie that is, whether it's funny or not, is intended to make you laugh as its primary source of entertainment. Horror movies are supposed to make you primarily entertain you through this repugnance, fear, disgust, tension, and dread. So we'll have physical violence and psychological terror. They may be studies of psychotic or disturbed characters, or perhaps of terrifying monsters or malevolent forces beyond human understanding. Thrillers are going to be more like movies that will be building unbearable tension and dread and are not necessarily going to always be going for the scare. Let's look at a slide that I have here, which is going to... Oh, did I have that on the right browser? Where do I have that? Here it is. There are some disagreements between horror and thriller fans as to which is which. But the main sort of distinctions as far as I see them. Broadly, horror focuses more on the scare, whereas thriller is more focused on suspense, chase, and mystery. And in specs, thrillers are usually going to be more based on... The hook is the situation, whereas in a horror movie, the hook is the threat. Almost always. Thrillers usually revolve less around the supernatural, but not always. Supernatural thriller is definitely a strong subgenre of this. There's sort of a game element to most thrillers, wherein the audience is more or less invited to kind of try to figure out what's going on, either the mystery or the culprit or who is the killer, or maybe just think of like, how would I get out of that situation, as or before the characters themselves do. So we're sort of invited to be a little bit more participatory in thrillers, in that you're usually trying to put the audience directly in the shoes of one character. Horror tends to be a little bit more ensemble for the most part, where we have like a large cast of characters, especially in this sort of slasher subgenre where you have to have an ensemble or else it's not a slasher movie. If it's just one person being chased the entire time, it's probably more of a thriller, because that is not going to have those sort of expectations that slasher has, which is a bunch of characters die. They usually will be killed by the same monster killer. I think we're hearing a little background noise from someone's mic. If you guys wouldn't mind keeping your mics muted so we just don't hear dogs barking and kids yelling at things. What else? So another big thing is that people don't really respect horror that much, and any horror that does well enough will usually end up being labeled a thriller. So you just have to kind of be used to the fact that you're the weird kid at the party, and if you ever if you ever do a really good job, people will be like, oh, you're not a weird kid after all, and you're like, well, no, I am a weird kid, you just liked it. So just be aware of that. People don't think very highly of it, and will often find excuses for things that they like to not actually be horror in the first place. So thrillers are clever and unpredictable. They're concise and to the point with absolutely no frills. So thriller writing is more just like about slicing your plot to the absolute bone. And we don't want to really soak in the dread as much as horror. Like horror, you can get a lot more mileage out of tense situations that are drawn out a little longer, whereas for thriller, the closer you can get to 90 pages on the dot, the better. Hooky, high concepts are really key in thriller. They should be almost always sold on the idea, just one sentence description of the premise itself, that you don't have to really rely on dense character study or like this level of unpredictability that horror sometimes thrives on. Like you can take especially like an A24 type horror movie. Let's look at a movie like Hereditary, right? Is there a hooky high concept? No. In fact, to tell too much about the concept almost spoils what will happen in the story. You just basically are best described, like you're gonna get the best description of it by hearing after the death of the family's matriarch, the grandmother, a grieving mother is slowly drawn into a mystery that results in supernatural violence. That's the best. Like by hearing that, if that intrigues you enough to go watch the movie, then you will get all the great things as surprises. It's not like there is some pressure cooker of a situation that has been specifically designed over like this person is right there at that moment and that person's right there at this moment, and there's a ticking clock that is pushing them closer together. It's a lot slower and more dramatic, and it has a lot more elements of family drama and things like that will pull you very gradually into this slow soaking horror, where thrillers, we don't really want to soak in things. They're shocking and memorable and scary, and perhaps even nowadays there's the expectation that they be topical or thematically fascinating after we get movies like Get Out and Parasite. I think that there's a lot more hunger for thrillers with something to say, or maybe just movies with something to say that could be expressed in a more accessible sort of broad appeal format like a thriller. This is a really, really, really popular genre. And not just in movies, in books. If you look at novels, like topping the charts a lot of the time will be true crime and psychological thrillers. This is just something that will sort of always interest us because it's designed to be as exciting as possible for as short a time as possible, and then it's over, and then you move on. Thrillers don't usually have sequels. They can, in theory, but usually if they do, it's going to be because it's like like in books, like police procedurals are classified as thrillers, or things like that, or detective stories where there's going to be one character solving crime after crime after crime. And in those cases, like sometimes you'll see movies do that, but just like not as often, because the stakes have to be so high and the intensity has to be up so much that to put the characters in multiple life or death situations at that same breakneck pace just can start to strain disbelief and draw incredulity from the audience if we're like, well, there's no way that they would have been able to get through two of those same insane life or death scenarios, that there's no way most people could get through one of them. Somebody, we have some questions in the chat. Logan says, Silence of the Lambs is one that's always debated if it's thriller or if it's horror. Yeah, exactly. And that's one that as soon as it gets enough acclaim, like I believe that movie won Best Picture, or at least Best Screenplay, you're going to get people saying, wait, no, it's not. It's the other thing. Where I see it as both. I mean, there's also just such a thing as a hybrid. Silence of the Lambs is a mystery investigation type movie, but with heavy horror elements, so much so that it is pretty much 50-50. There are jump scare sequences. There are cannibals biting people's faces off. But the primary action is going to be investigation, solving the crime, putting clues together, interviewing witnesses, things like that. So I would just call it a hybrid. That also exists. So thriller plot types, these are the main ones that I usually focus on. We have supernatural and sci-fi. We have crime, survival, and mystery. And if we're going to say horror thriller, usually it's going to be survival subtype. Whereas horror movies are going to mostly have these subtypes. They're going to be more focused on these three: drama, survival, and mystery. So drama is going to be movies like I mentioned, a lot of A24 horror, such as Midsummer, A Dark Song, The Lodge. Basically, the plot type or the conflict is going to revolve around interpersonal issues with the characters, that the characters usually have to either overcome these interpersonal issues in order to defeat the threat, or these issues themselves are the threat somehow, and they're manifesting in the world perhaps in some kind of way, like the Babadook, wherein kind of like the mother's grief and like difficulties with her son are forming as this monster in the world that they have to, in order to solve the external problem, you have to solve the internal problem, or come to some kind of synthesis of those problems throughout the movie. So like in combating one, you must combat the other, basically. So those are going to be the characters' goals. They're usually going to be problems with another person or with within themselves. Then we have survival, where your problem is going to be some external threat that is threatening to kill you. Basically, these have to be life and death stakes, or else it doesn't really feel dangerous enough. It's not going to feel like horror if it's something that will just sort of hurt you and not actually kill you. So we have everything from slasher movies like Friday the 13th. Somebody mentioned Jaws earlier, survival subtype in that. The character's main goal is either to kill the threat or to get away from the threat, but basically just don't die. Now, almost all horror gets here at some point. Most stories that start in a different one of these subtypes will eventually escalate to survival by the end. So it's one of the more common subtypes if we look at the main primary types being mystery. So mystery is just this really common plot type where the characters are trying to solve a question of some kind. Often that question is going to be, what is the monster and how do I beat it? But in order to get there, we have to go through steps of learning the story of where did it come from, or like we see this in everything from The Conjuring to Lights Out to The Ring. In order to piece together how to defeat the monster, we must first discover who and what it is and what it wants and how it was wronged and like what sin was committed against it or something like this. But ultimately, in order to beat the threat, we have to answer a question through the assembly of clues. So, any questions about this distinction between these three sort of main things that we're doing here? Logan says, I always thought Scream is more horror. Yeah, Scream is horror. I think that some people might be like, it's kind of a thriller because it doesn't have anything supernatural in it. But yeah, no, I've always classified Scream as horror. Carmen says, The Gift was a good one. Yep, that's a kind of forgotten early or mid-90s supernatural thriller. Isn't that by Sam Raimi as well? And Keanu Reeves is in it? Yeah, it's good. And Jason also says Scream is horror comedy. Yeah, so Scream is like horror with it's like mystery primary type with the subtype is survival, but it also has a lot of comedy in it, which is one of the things that we're not really going to talk about as much is horror comedy, just because these are often mostly comedy with horror plot elements and settings. There are exceptions like Shaun of the Dead and Scream are exceptions to this, where it's a horror movie with just some comedy here and there. But these are more often just straight horror with a careful comedic tone, so like we aren't really going to talk about them too differently. Action horror is something I won't really get into as much as well, is often going to be action films with horror scenery or character, like ghoulish characters or settings, but they might have some scare sequences like Aliens or something, Predator. Some people, or some of the Predator movies, maybe not the first one, but some people consider those to be like action horror. We have something like horror romance, like Let the Right One In, which is just like not really super well defined, so I don't think there's enough sort of tropes in place to talk too much about that one yet. Jason asks, is Midsommar mystery, survival, or drama? Well, good question, because it's kind of all three. Midsommar is drama primary, but there is a bit of mystery, and by the end it escalates into survival. But the main character is not really trying that hard for most of it to piece together what's going on. It's actually mostly her boyfriend who is doing that. And, like, primarily the movie is concerned with the relationship between them and the problems that they're having. And sort of, by resolving the external threat of the movie, we resolve the internal issue of their relationship in a sort of dark way. So the fact that it is framed very much on their relationship makes it drama first and foremost. And then just there is the light survival. I mean, no one's ever trying to really kill Danny is the thing. So I hesitate to say it escalates to survival, though some of the other characters do die. Okay, so, and Jason says Cabin in the Woods, horror with comedy elements. Yeah, exactly. That's another, yeah, it's a little more on the goofy side than something like Scream. But yeah, very much still has lots of both. Okay, so let's look at stakes. So with horror, if stakes are not life and death, you should have a really good reason. Those don't have to be the only stakes or the only things at risk, but we can also fear mutilation or loss of loved ones or insanity or any of these things. But just given how much think of what a movie is supposed to be. It's like a pressure cooker of a situation that is getting increasingly more difficult. throughout the series of it with a series of subsequently more difficult challenges that are presented to your main character that then have to culminate with some kind of finale, and then it's over. And like, if you want to have if your premise is going to be based on something as high stakes as life and death, like a horror or thriller situation, then it has to usually escalate to this mortal threat by the end, or else it feels like you've misplayed something. Thriller doesn't always necessarily have to, but horror pretty much does, unless you have something way better in mind. The only real exceptions to this are something like, if you were going to like mitigate the stakes and decrease the stakes at the end of the movie or throughout the movie, something like The Others from 2001, it might be the only real example of this I can think of, because that's one wherein we learn the characters were in fact in less danger than they thought, but the twist, it's only because of a twist that is more horrifying than anything we could have suggested up until then. So the danger of a horror script must be death unless you've got something worse in mind. Thrillers, if the threat is more psychological, it might be a thriller. If the consequences are more sort of social, or if they're played very matter-of-factly and realistically, then and really aren't kind of being orchestrated for their maximum level of entertaining scariness, then it might be more of a dark drama or a crime thriller, something like Detroit or American History X or In Cold Blood, which have sequences that are disturbing and frightening, but play it so sort of matter-of-factly and realistically that it's hard to say that it's going for horror-type thrills. Okay, so hopefully you get it. Life and death, unless you've got something better. So, on tropes and cliches and expectations. So, the audience has seen a million of these... Oh, sorry, does someone have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah. You said In Cold Blood was a thriller?
No, that's a dark drama, or like a... that's the distinction I was making. That's more of a dark crime drama. And you can usually tell because in those movies, although they might have scary moments in them, they're usually going to be more realistic and matter-of-fact, and they're not going to be playing up every scene to be as scary as possible.
And I had another question I put in the chat about, I don't know if you've seen it, it's called I'm Thinking About Ending Things.
Yeah, the Charlie Kaufman movie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is that a drama thriller, or what would you think that was?
I would consider that an experimental art house drama, personally, but I think some people have been kind of unnerved by portions of it, or have found certain parts of it kind of spooky. I mean, it's that's a tough one to define. There's not really another movie like that.
It does the brain in, definitely.
Yeah, I guess psychological drama for the most part, with like kind of art house sensibilities. Okay. But yeah, some people have disagreed and said no, it's a horror, or it is kind of spooky, or it's like I don't know. You should ask someone else for that movie, I guess, in particular, because I'm just not sure. I don't really know what he was doing with that one. Where are we? Okay, so tropes and cliches and expectations. So the audience has seen a lot of this, and you should be aware that the market is very saturated with these, and that this is super popular, and like I said, low barrier of entry into this, so anyone can kind of make these, and so the audience has seen everything, and they are hungry for this kind of stuff. Like, the fact that they've seen everything and keep coming back for it is a good sign that shows that the same sorts of thrills are always going to be appealing to this audience. But that works for us and it works against us, because it means that while, like, you can't do things that are very similar to something you've seen before, like 100%, you can find ways of twisting those things and making them slightly different, just so that the audience finds it fresh enough, and that we can use their expectations to moreover surprise them. So if you aren't aware of these tropes and conventions, then you really need to watch and read as much of this genre as you possibly can, because if you end up just writing scenes that are blatantly, like, have been the joke, like the butt of the joke for 30 years of this, then the audience is going to be like, oh, this is a setup for a joke, right? And then it won't be, and you'll be like, oh no, you just played this cliche straight. So don't do that. If you're going to be using these cliches and tropes, then know that they are there, and know like what the audience is thinking. Oh, I know how this is gonna go. Let's talk about some cliches and some very familiar elements of horror. So let's break it into a couple categories. What about settings? What are some cliched, first thing off the top of your head, settings for a horror scenario? Jason says a cabin in the woods, a lake house. Yes, exactly. What else?
A dark hallway with a flicking light.
Okay, like like an abandoned building, or a building at night with a flickering lights. That might be some scenery that we see often. Nacho says an ancestral manor, haunted houses or hospitals, some super giant wealthy person house. I think we've sort of said the same thing several times. A manor, a giant wealthy person house. I think people usually do call that a mansion, don't they? And yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of the sort of secluded, large locations, large interior locations like abandoned homes or large wealthy homes, because I think those are both, the nice thing is those are just very spooky on their own, and also are secluded and easy to film in for a horror scenario. You can block out all the windows and just shoot night the whole time. Like, it's just easy to make a movie in one house. And the nice thing about horror, and part of the reason why the bar is so low to get into it, is because things that make better horror stories are also things that make cheaper movies. Isn't that cool? That's not the case for other genres, like for action. Like things that, not always. There's like limited interesting ways you can do action, but it's not like by having less explosions, it's more exciting, inherently. But by having less people around and less sort of society and less access to emergency services and less, people around to help and less lighting and all these things that cost money, those actually do make a story inherently scarier. Or not just a story, but just like cinema inherently scarier. People are saying cornfields, basement, empty train stations, underneath shopping centers, abandoned church. Yep, these are good answers. Dark, secluded places are pretty common for this, because those are just kind of, they trip certain alarms in our heads and survival mechanisms, because horror is kind of like hacking your own survival mechanisms for entertainment. Isn't that neat? So we have all these things that are coded into our brains that say like, oh, look, we look for visual patterns of things to avoid. We look out for, why when like your sibling comes in your room really quietly or something and you turn around and you don't see them at first, but then you catch them at the corner of your eye. They don't make a noise, but you still jump and you still get that like shocked feeling when you just notice someone standing there that you didn't notice at first. That's a survival mechanism. It's because it's there because we want to be able to identify predators and attackers that are hiding in camouflage or that are, in the woods or it's dark. The movies in this genre are taking that sort of mechanism, that sort of like internal survival trait, and we're using that against ourselves, like in a controlled way, in the same manner that a roller coaster is kind of entertaining, or eating hot sauce is kind of fun because it like burns in a controlled way, because as humans we crave pain in controllable doses, right? Because that is kind of like inherently it trips these sort of like entertaining like lights in our brain when we have something dangerous or scary happen to us that we are actually, it's actually not that dangerous or scary. It's the same as the roller coaster. Like, we feel like we're in danger, but we're simulating danger. We're not actually in any. And by the time it's over, we can leave it and we're like, oh, I just had that little thrill of, what if I had been in danger? So yeah, in all of these tools that we're using in horror and thriller, whether it's, just cinematography, or if it's certain storytelling elements that we're always intending to go for the throat and to be really gripping and to present something scary and visceral that people will not forget, you can do that best by targeting these inherent sort of survival mechanisms that are in people. Why do you think the creepy kid, like, speaking of cliched imagery, let's talk about characters. I'm going to just start you off with the creepy little kid that seems like they know more of what's going on than they're letting on. What are some other cliched horror characters? Clowns, old lady who just appears, vampires. Let me turn the chat window on. Whoop. Stupid characters. That might be more of a result of just poor writing than a scary trope by itself. But yeah, a nurse or a butler or a mad doctor. Sure. So there's a certain trend in these, and this sort of issue becomes cliched over time, because at first you can probably think that like clowns as a scary object were not necessarily like that was subversive at some point. I think maybe I'm not exactly sure where the scary clown started to take over the regular clown just in media perception. It might have been It, Stephen King, back when that book came out, or maybe it was Killer Clowns from Outer Space, or something like that. But eventually the subversion of that happy, scary image, or of the happy, goofy image, being played for scariness, that becomes so well trodden that it doesn't really have the same impact anymore. So it becomes a cliche when you just use it for the same thing that it's always used for. It just stops having its original effect. What else? So, like, what other things that people mentioned in here? Old ladies, right? Children. These are things that are supposed to be harmless. And in horror, they are often used to build kind of dread or tension because it's like this thing that shouldn't be able to hurt you might actually be able to hurt you in this scenario. Think of, like, the creepy music box that's playing, or the Jack-in-the-Box, or any of these, like, if you hear children's music or laughter or creepy children's drawings, those are all subverting the part in our brain or activating this part in our brain that's saying this is something that should be safe and non-harmful. But in this situation, what if it was really dangerous, and what if it could sort of hurt you? But if you use that the same way every time, then it's going to become ineffective. In the same way that if you shoot lasers at the Borg enough, then they start to absorb the lasers or something. You get the idea. Good answers here for the cliche characters. We're seeing dolls. Yeah, dolls, again, it's a thing that should be harmless and should be an innocent sign of childhood, but here it's being used to be harmful, be a sign of a threat, a source of a thing that can harm you. So that is something that at first was probably very effective, but now, and I guess, they still make Annabelle movies. It's not like this goes away entirely, but creepy doll, creepy clown, creepy old lady, these things are cliches. They are tropes for a reason. How about some scare sequences? What are some scary sequences we've seen many times?
Oh, House on Haunted Hill, when they were looking in the camera and there was nothing there, and you move the camera, it's there. Move the camera again, it's not there. Do you move the camera and it's closer?
Right.
And then it just runs up to you, yeah.
Right. So, yeah, character looking through something like a viewfinder or binoculars or a telescope, and then they bring it down, they bring it back up, and the thing's right in their face. Yep, we see that all the time with the peephole in the door. And I think some of these are gonna be things that they are cliches because they sort of always work. And I want to specifically highlight the peephole in the door and the hiding in the closet as the killer searches the room for you, and you're looking at the slats of the what do you call it, the closet, the openings in the closet, because those just feel really visceral. Like, everyone can relate to that feeling because we've all played hide and seek with your siblings or something like that, and we've all had that feeling of like hiding and holding your breath and hoping not to be caught. But it just feels so violating and realistic to have somebody be like searching your own house for you with a knife, and they're gonna catch you if they get you in the closet. Or like your peephole in the door is like, that's how if you hear a knock on the door, that's the thing everyone can relate to, being sort of uneasy peeking through that little hole because you don't know what you're gonna see on the other side. So that can be like a real easy scare scene. Other comments say footsteps getting closer, monster killer holding knife and hammer breaks through the wall extremely close to the fleeing protagonist. Oh yeah, so often this is going to be like Jason Voorhees will come through a window or something and grab someone just as they think they're safe. In zombie movies, this one comes up all the time where it's like, oh, phew, we got away. Someone says, anyone busy doing something and someone's watching?
No, I know, but
we're getting some background noise from someone's mic.
I don't know if they are.
If you guys wouldn't mind keeping your mics muted. Which mic is that? Sea Ghost? Thank you. We sometimes will hear kids or dogs barking or things like that, so just make sure to click the small white microphone icon in the bottom left of the screen if you're not muted already. So yeah, these are all some great examples of scary sequences that we've seen before, and a lot of these we have to realize that cliches are there because they work and because they do actively touch on something that is effective. They only stop becoming effective when they're doing this in a way that we've seen exactly before. So what's a way that we could do your character trapped in the closet looking out at the killer who's coming to get them from first person POV scene? What's a way we could do that we've never seen before? How can you kind of turn that scene on its head, or do that in a different setting or a different context?
They're in the closet, and you're in the closet and you're looking through the peephole and something's coming closer to you. You're getting frightened, and then they open the door. It's your sister. But as soon as you get relieved, a hand comes down and snatches you out of the closet from the ceiling.
Oh, yeah, sure. So you set it up so it seems like it's one kind of scare sequence, and then at the end, it actually is a different kind. So like if you do the sort of false, the old switcheroo, where at the end it's not actually the scary thing we thought we were building up to, and then something else unexpected but still within the realm of possibility within your movie gets the character instead. That's a great way to do it. They do that in some of the Grudge movies, or the Ju-on, the original Japanese series. John F. Gilman says, have the one in the closet be the killer, but we don't know this at first. Sure, yeah, you could do that. That's a very sort of Scream thing to do, where like we have the from the first-person POV of what we think is the victim in the closet as somebody goes around the room searching for them until finally they wrench the closet open and we realize, wait a minute, that's the victim on the outside. Then the first-person, knife comes down or whatever. I feel like Halloween might do something like that as well. But yeah, you can always find ways to take these expectations and these things that the audience, they think they know exactly how it's going to go, and you can use that against them, because then when it doesn't go that way, you can totally pull the rug out from under them and surprise them even more in a way that shows that you are aware of the expectations of the genre, and that shows that they're not really going to be safe. Like, the things that they're expecting to happen aren't going to happen. So it's helpful if you do these things early as possible in the movie. If you have a scene that sort of seems like it's along the lines of something the audience has seen before, if you quickly show, wait, though, we're not going to do that. The Ring does this beautifully. In the opening sequence of The Ring, there's several moments that sort of pretend like they're going to do a familiar jump scare in the opening sequence when Becca is coming down the stairs. She gets on the phone with her mom, and then she opens the fridge door, and then she shuts the fridge door, and the camera lingers in such a way as you think, oh, there's got to be something behind the fridge door, because they always do that. And then there's not. And then it does that, like, again, a little bit later with some other sort of very familiar, like a medicine cabinet, or like some reveal that in a more cliched movie would clearly have been the scare. And then it veers away from it again. And The Ring is always really playing with those expectations of, like, where do you think the scare will be? And then at the last second, it's like, wait, no, you don't even see it at all. And then 2 scenes later, it comes back in a totally unexpected way. So they're always doing stuff like that in that script in a way that is so aware of what the audience is waiting for. Okay, so John, here's a question. John Gilman says, meta horror films best watched if one is already familiar with horror film tropes. I would say so. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you would take away from it if you weren't even familiar with the tropes. Maybe you've like seen one of the scary movies or something and you just thought it was like a weird comedy. But like, I think, yeah, you're not going to get specifically what the jokes are if you aren't aware of what the reference is going to be. It might just seem sort of random and surreal if you go into a meta horror film and it has these rules that it seems like it thinks that you know but you don't know them. It might just not be as entertaining. Okay, so here's a couple cliches that I'm always I'm trying to find ways to avoid and subvert, and ones that really stand out to me nowadays. The first one is the cell reception or the cell phones. Oh, cell phones don't work here. Oh no, I dropped my cell phone in the water. Oh no, I've been trying all day to get a signal. This kind of stuff, it stands out so much nowadays. And you have, because like it became so common because when cell phones came out, it was suddenly this massive problem for horror and thriller writing, because it was like, oh crap, I can't seclude the characters in the same way when everyone's in touch with each other at all times. And so it became this mainstay of the genre that in every single one they have some freaking reason why the cell phones aren't gonna work. So like careful with that one. Try to find an interesting reason why calling for help won't end your scenario. Maybe even allow your characters to call the cops. You know how long it takes the cops to show up? Like, the fact that people think that being able to call the cops would just ruin their scenario puts a lot of faith into the police departments around this great nation of ours. It takes quite a while for the cops to show up sometimes. It can actually add a great ticking clock to a story where, like, 30 minutes before the end, your characters actually succeed in calling the police, and now they're on their way. So now we know they just have to last 30 more minutes. Those things can actually add a great deal of tension to the movie. You don't have to just find some excuse for, like, why there was no cell phone there, or think of if there's something supernatural at play. You can even find some interesting way to turn the trying to call for help scene into a scare sequence if it's the villain on the other end somehow, or something like that. So, like, always be looking for ways to take these cliches and find some new thing to do with them that actually makes the movie work better. Jason says, the police in my neighborhood are infamous for being the worst in the city. They're known to report crimes but not actually stop them. Okay, so you can see in Jason's scenario, if Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees attacked him in his home and he called 911, the movie would not be over by any means. So there you go. Different parts of the country are going to have different expectations there. But you can see how that doesn't have to be just the same rote, plain moment in every movie. How about this one? We lost Deborah. Oh no, not Deborah. And we just move on. Like, this became so clear. We were talking about Hereditary earlier. After watching that one, it almost becomes difficult to go back to other horror movies in which the sort of grief of the characters is so glossed over, which in most horror stories it is. Because grief is so, and I think Hereditary really shows this, that grief is so sort of all-consuming, and it's such an insanely, distracting thing in real life that unless people are in the middle of some kind of incredibly intense survival scenario, like, you can forgive the pilots over the Death Star for not stopping to be too sad when their fellow pilot gets blown up in an X-Wing or whatever. But in a scenario where, like, days are going by and, like, we actually are going to start to see the effects of grief set into a community or a family, that can kind of take over the whole movie if you're not careful. Like, so if you don't want it to, then you can see why certain filmmakers will want to, like, we show that the family screams, we found the corpse, then we skip to, the funeral, or we skip to after the funeral, or we skip to years later, or we skip to days later, or any of these things. Like, the thing to be aware of is that it stands out more nowadays. After sort of A24, horror movies made this, like, come into sharper focus, I should say. It is more apparent now when you do that, oh no, not Deborah thing. So, careful with that. Yeah, for those watching live, this is a live class. We're on Discord, so you can join us at scriptcamp.net to get the link to our Discord server and participate in the class. We have chat right here. We have about an hour left, so there's definitely time to join us if you'd like. Okay, let's keep going through the slideshow here and talk about what is scary and why does it matter. So I talked a bit about how scary is something that's just built into us as a survival mechanism, right? That things are scary to us because when you are scared of something, you run away from it and you don't die from it, and then you are more likely to have children and do the human thing. So you can look at it as just something very written into who we are, and it's at the root of why we still tell stories in general. The first ever stories told by humanity when we had the language and ability to do this were horror stories. There's a bear in the cave, don't go in there. I saw someone go in there and he got eaten, don't go in there. Basically, the simplest story there is. It's a story that can sort of be one sentence. And horror often can be boiled down. It's so elemental to us that you'll see whole trends like writing prompts, these things like 2-sentence horror stories. There's a whole subreddit for those. There's a whole TV show based on 2-sentence horror stories. So, like, the fact that you can boil it down to such simple terms proves that it works. It's like humor. Horror and humor are kind of like at the very core of who we are, in that they are, they're partially just written into us. Like, there are some things that are funny or scary to you no matter who you are. There's some things that are cultural and that are funny or scary based on expectations and imagery that we're familiar with, or ideas that things represent in our culture. But there's always going to be this element that is just based on the time that we're in. So, like, things that are scary are subjective, and they're completely up to the individual, just like humor. So tastes change with culture and with saturation, and some stuff nowadays, or some people nowadays, would laugh at scenes in Halloween or Psycho that had audiences shrieking in the theater when they came out. You can watch early audience reactions from movies like Psycho, where if you showed that to, I don't know, a middle schooler nowadays, they'd be like, that was dumb, that looked dumb, that wasn't scary at all. You can chalk that up to just how accustomed to seeing media in a certain, like, how accustomed we get to just seeing media in a certain way. I mean, if all of your movies are in that same sort of collection of styles and conventions, like if they all have the goofy music and the goofy lighting, or however you might want to define it, then, like, you're going to stop, like, I'm sure in 30 or 40 years, people might look back at movies from our era and say the same things. That looks dumb. That doesn't look convincing. That CGI is bad. Any of these things. So, like, modern audiences can stop finding things scary even within, like, 10 years. So within 10 years, people might look back at something like Get Out or Ready or Not and say, that's very goofy. That's very of its time. So you can't really ever predict those things or keep up with them, just what the audience culturally is going to be ready for or in tune for. You have to just kind of take your best swing at it. Horror writing is really delicate, and more blood and death doesn't always mean scarier, though I did mention that certain elements that do make the genre what it is, do make for easier movie making. Things like secluded location, limited cast, these things make for an easier shoot and a cheaper production, and they also just make something inherently a bit, lonelier. More dangerous for the characters, more sort of hollow and empty and unsettling. But more blood and death doesn't mean scarier by default, nor does more tension and build up necessarily. For instance, if you are building up to something that is not worth it, like if you can't pay it off, then it's going to feel like all that tension was for nothing. So you should try to just do this enough that you can trust that your instincts and ability to orchestrate emotion on the page will render your work frightening in the same sense that most people aren't really writing jokes into their comedy outlines. It's hard to read something as scary on an outline. It's just a one-sentence description of a scene. You know, the ghost comes out of the sewer and eats him. That might not scare you on its own. So you have to get used to like the idea that I'm going to find a way to make that scary on the page. And so much of it is going to just rely on cinematography and performances and sound that there's only so much that you can do. So the best way to learn how to write scarier things, in my opinion, my assertion, is that you have to get better at writing everything else. So if you can write a strong story and characters that we care about, then the scariness will follow because we will just be more concerned for those people. When you have compelling mystery and strong pacing and good scene work and motivated and fascinating characters that we care about, and then you start putting those scary sequences in, then you start getting really effective movie, and it just makes everything else scarier. So I know he's kind of controversial and maybe not always the best comparison to use, but I'm a big fan of the writing of S. Craig Zahler, who wrote movies like Bone Tomahawk and Brigands of Rattleforge, who he is a writer of very, very unarguably horrific stories, but they're very rich with character development, and they the fact that we get to know who each of the people are in such depth and in such detail before the terrible thing starts happening just makes his work always kind of have you on the edge of your seat, because you never know, like, oh god, is even my favorite character gonna die here? Like, is something unimaginably awful gonna happen to that person? I really like that character. But he convinces you, oh no, the bad guys will do it. There's no one safe. So, yeah, really clever and delicate balance in his work. Some more questions in the chats. John Gilman has asked, wasn't Ready or Not meant to be goofy? Yeah, it's pretty goofy in most of it. It's like probably 70% horror, 30% comedic, I would say, which, as far as those movies go, is a pretty big ratio. Jason says some of my favorite villains are played by some of my favorite comics, like Robin Williams, Jim Carrey, John Lithgow. What are my favorite unproduced horror scripts? Well, it's not really horror. I was just talking about S. Craig Zahler, but I really, really like Brigands of Rattleforge, which is, I would say, a horrific epic western, I guess. It's like an epic western that is so violent and upsetting that it basically does have horror elements. And it's like 3 hours long, or it would be like 2.5 to 3 hours long, but has such fantastic dialogue, fantastic character work, and just really rich scenery and setting and just detail on every page. I just think it's fantastic. And maybe I'll think of more examples of more horror-focused stuff as we go on. All right, so what's scary in a movie? So different things are scary in different contexts. There's some stuff that's scary when somebody tells it to you. There's some stuff that's scary when you read about it, and there's some stuff that is scary when you see it visually with images and sound and actors actually doing it. So there's a couple main things. We have anticipation and dread, the unseen, shock, which is essentially the culmination of the dread, right? And then the last thing is going to be corrupted and broken mundanity, which I'll get to in a few slides and explain fully what this means. So, I don't want to go through this video clip at the moment because I don't think we have enough full time in the class, because this is not the 3-hour version. But let's talk about what a couple of these things mean. So, anticipation and dread. Do I have full slides on these? I must. Maybe not in this slideshow. Okay. So, anticipation and dread, that's going to be the build up to the scary thing happening, right? That's going to be the really, really slow push down the hallway towards that slightly cracked door that the light is flickering on the other side, and there's something wet seeping out underneath the crack of the door, and we hear something awful happening in that room. That's going to be that anticipation and dread. Think of those moments in Evil Dead 2013 where the Deadites are first starting to take over, and there's that girl who's just kind of crouching in the shower, like thunking against the wall, and the guy is slowly coming into the room, and he opens the door, and the room is thick with the fog of the heat. And like, think of just the build-up as the anticipation and the dread. It's everything that leads to that scary moment. We have some background noise from someone. If you guys wouldn't mind muting your mics, please. Thank you. Okay, so anticipation and dread. So if we look on the other end of that, it's shock. It's the thing that we actually get to once once the dread is done. Once we have pushed the tension as far as it can go, you have to actually pay it off with something. So that's going to, like, how effective that thing is going to depend on, like, yes, like we've talked about, how often we've seen that thing before, the exact way that we've seen it before, perhaps the viscerality of the thing that we see. I mean, more violent does make something more disturbing, but what makes something more violent? Guillermo del Toro has talked about this idea before of making violence hurt on screen. And this is going to come down to like shock, which is the same principle that we're talking about. Like, but something isn't shocking if we've seen it 100 times, no matter how bad it would really be if it really happened to you, because everyone has had a paper cut, but no one has had their head cut off before and lived to tell about it, right? So you can especially see this in things like watch a compilation of all the Mortal Kombat finishing moves, the fatalities, and you'll see how over the years they find different ways to make those animations hurt and different ways to make them feel brutal and unexpected and visceral, because there's only so many ways that Scorpion can pull off Sub-Zero's head or pull out his heart or rip somebody's limbs off or throw them into a spinning blade or something like that. There's only so many ways that you can do that. So in the more recent games, they've sort of been making them even more disturbing by pulling back a little bit on just the insanity of the, like, flying gore and limbs and things like that, and they are focused more on, like, small visceral details in a pretty gross way. So it's worth look into Mortal Kombat 11 full fatalities compilation, and you'll see some stuff that you're like, wow, that wasn't the most horrible thing I could possibly think of, but the fact that it played out that way did really, it felt more sort of realistic and visceral and real than I would have thought. I'm thinking of, for instance, like, there's a scene where Kitana throws one of her, or is this Kano who does this? Like, Kano throws a knife, and it just thunks into his opponent's throat, and they just grab at the blade, and they're gurgling blood, and it's bubbling and frothing out around the wound, and then they collapse face first onto it, so it pushes the knife through the back of their head. And that's, like, not the craziest, most absolutely, you know, that's not cutting someone's legs off and beating them to death with their own teeth or whatever. That's not, like, the most outrageous murder ever, but the fact that it is so focused on those details, you know, like, the bubbles, the gurgling sound. Like, think of how those things hurt more on screen than you would think. Like Del Toro said, we've seen someone get stabbed in the stomach on screen 1,000,000 times. Would that be the most painful thing in real life that most people would ever possibly experience? Yes, probably. But the fact that we've seen it before so many times in the same way means that it doesn't really hurt for us to watch. You'll see that in, like, a Disney movie now. Someone just gets stabbed in the stomach with a knife, they die right away. That's obviously not how you would really, how that injury would, you don't just die right away from getting stabbed in the stomach. But that aside, look at, you know, if you stab a character in the cheek, in the side of the face, that hurts more because it's like, oh, we don't normally see that. So in Pan's Labyrinth, yeah, somebody mentioned Pan's Labyrinth in the chat. Though he finds every time there's violence in the movie, it's like there's something in it that adds a level of viscerality to it that we're just not used to seeing. It's not just like people getting shot with guns. It's a character puts his hand up to try to block someone from putting a gun to his head. He puts the gun to his hand and fires through his hand into his head. Like, there's always finding, like, ways of making it more horrible and more visceral and make it just hurt more. Any questions on how to make violence hurt more? This is so psychopathic. You signed up for a horror class, so you should have known what you were getting into, I will say. But any questions or comments on just the viscerality of violence on screen? In the chat, John Gilman says, horror sequels sometimes abandon the horror genre due to the narrative no longer necessitating it. I like it when those are done well, like in Evil Dead or Evil Aliens or Army of Darkness. Yeah, that's one of the great things about the Evil Dead franchise is that it sort of is the tone is very variable from entry to entry. Like, the tone in the video games is very different from the tone in the first movie, which is different than the tone in the second movie. And the third movie is basically just a fantasy dark comedy with horror elements. So yeah, that franchise is crazy. Good luck trying to piece that together or figure out how that story works exactly. There's, like, so many split timelines that it's almost completely pointless. And horror normally, horror films and filmmakers are not usually expecting to get a sequel. So the chronologies become almost impossible to track almost instantly as they start being forced to make sequels, or somebody else is making sequels, or someone else takes over the franchise, like with the Saw movies after the first two, or look at something like Halloween. How many different Halloween timelines are there now? I believe 4. There is the primary Laurie Strode timeline from the first movie, which is concluded with Halloween H2O. There is the timeline with the Season of the Witch movie, which is was the third one that was made because Carpenter wanted them to be more anthological, and that only has that one movie and doesn't actually connect to Michael Myers, I think, except for maybe in one very small way. Then there's the the first reboot timeline, which is the Rob Zombie reboots from 2005 when the first one came out, I think, in which we go into Michael's backstory much more and sort of like build out his story as a kid, and Laurie is his sister, I think. And then there's a sequel to that reboot, but then there's another reboot that ignores the continuity of the H2O conclusion to the original Laurie Strode timeline, and now is assuming only the first movie happened and none of the subsequent sequels from that original story. So, holy crap, this is a movie about a guy that gets out of prison and murders people in his hometown. Like, do we really have to have such a complicated series of events for this, or like series of continuities and retcons and just like insane chronology for this? Not really. John says there's also a Curse of Thorn one, H2O retcon that first. Okay, yeah, so maybe there's 5 timelines. Who can keep track? There's almost no point in trying to keep track. Or Evil Dead is another one where it's like, after the first movie, is the second one a reboot of the first one? Or is Ash going back to the same cabin, but he has the same girlfriend, but she's played by somebody else? What? So, yeah, not you're gonna have to struggle to put together the just like logic of some horror films just due to the reality of how they come out or how they are made. They're not usually made expecting to get another, and when they do, problems occur. How did I get onto that topic? Let's talk about the other things that make something scary in a movie. So, anticipation and dread, remember, is our first thing. You're building up to that scary thing. Shock is going to be a disgusting, scary, like in-your-face thing that makes the audience jump. It doesn't have to be associated with or attached to the jump scare, but shock is going to be something that would make the audience jump. Mike Flanagan movies have gotten really good in particular about this, what I call the silent jump scare, which is where it's sort of like what I was talking about earlier, where you will just sort of notice someone in the room, in the background of the room, or like a light will turn on and they will just be standing there in the dark or sitting there in the foreground. And there's not like a loud noise or a lot of build up to it. It just, we just sort of get that little mini shock of just seeing someone there. His prequel called Ouija Origin of Evil has a lot of really good moments like this. So, what else is scary in a movie? Corrupted and broken mundanity and the unseen. So, people were talking about Jaws earlier. If you want to know what makes Jaws so effective, or what ended up making it so effective, is this concept of the unseen. The fact that so much of the movie is building mystery over, like, first of all, if you don't know what it is going into it, if you can't figure out it's a shark, I think you would figure it out pretty soon. But even in the opening scene, we don't even see it at all. I don't think we even see the fin. And much of that, you can argue, is due to perhaps production difficulties where the shark model they had wasn't working properly, or all these things, all these very famous anecdotes. But it really works for the movie because, like I said, horror is amplified by the things that make movies easier to make, which is what will always make it one of the more attractive entry points. So things that we don't see, you just can't help but imagine how bad that they actually are, which is why sort of the audience's imagination does a lot of the work in horror. Let's talk about, has anyone ever played, does anybody play scary video games? Like the Amnesia games, which were very popular back in like 2013. Back when I was in college, these were really popular. These are sort of mystery exploration based horror games. Oh, Maria says she owns a couple. Great. And Outlast, yeah, Slender Man. People are bringing up these other things that are in the same sort of vein. Like Amnesia really popularized this genre of you run away from the monsters, you can't really fight them, you're basically going around solving puzzles and hiding, and trying not to get killed by them. But why do I bring up the Amnesia games in particular? It's because there's an interesting behind-the-scenes story from the developers who have talked about how early on in their development process, they added this sanity mechanic to these games where if you're standing in the darkness, your character has a sort of like an invisible sanity meter, or I think at first they even had it be visible, like you could watch a bar go down, and the lower that it goes down, the more scared your character gets, the more freaky things start happening in the world. Like you'll see hallucinations of bugs crawling on the walls, or like Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem did this really well on the GameCube as well, back in 2002 or 2003. So they found that this would freak the players out a little bit, but early on, and I might be butchering this, but the players would get way more freaked. They realized they would get way more freaked out when they didn't list all the effects that the insanity would have. They didn't tell you what would actually occur when the sanity got low enough. It just warns you it's like bad things will happen, basically. And the players got so much more scared of that when they were like, oh god, like my sanity's getting low. Oh, what was that over there? Like, what was that sound? Could that have been part of the hallucinations? Like, the more work you can make the audience's mind do on its own, you can sort of trick them into scaring themselves. Have you guys seen Paranormal Activity? That's basically the whole movie. Paranormal Activity has like 3 scary parts. It's almost entirely build up and anticipation and dread and things that are unseen, or things that are just like right off camera, or they're just like the very subtle, the brush of a curtain, or like a long stationary shot of a bedroom, and then a lamp tips over, or something like that. So much of this franchise is based on just stuff that you don't see, because the audience's imagination can do more backflips than we could do with all the CGI that we have available to us. It's why you want to, a lot of the time, leave certain things off screen, or you want to not show the monster too early or too much, or else it'll lose that edge of the unseen. The more unseen something is, the more power it kind of has. How many times does Samara show up in the ring? As in her scary monster form? 1 at the very end of a more than 2 hour long movie, and still like the whole movie is about building up to that one scene and building dread around her appearance and all these omens that manifest. It just sort of feels like she's around. The whole movie feels like it's soaked in the well. It feels like it's in that videotape. Even the color grading, everything about it feels wet and like decaying and wrong, and like we're watching something that we're not supposed to be watching. So the more you can build up with the unseen, the more, once we get to that dread, so the unseen leads to dread and anticipation, which leads to shock once we actually get to the scary thing. Samir says the ritual is another great one where we don't see the monsters at the end. The monsters design is great. Yeah, that one's sort of like an ancient, like Nordic pagan sort of folklore monster thing. That's kind of cool. What's the last thing? Corrupted and broken mundanity. What does this mean? Anybody want to take a shot at this one? Defining this?
Connor, I think I can give an example.
Go ahead.
And something that has been scaring me my entire life. And it's kind of embarrassing because it is so scary to me. In The Exorcist, when she's sitting in the living room in a chair, her arm is lifted up mid-air and her hand is limped at the wrist. And for some reason, my entire life, that image has haunted me.
Interesting. Okay, so she's just sitting in the living room with nothing overtly terrifying going on, but then her hand is sort of puppeted by the evil spirit.
Yeah, and just you lifting up your hand like that just now brings that fear. Yeah, it's so weird. My friends do that to me all the time to scare me.
Wow, that clearly left a strong impact. And the fact that so like the mundanity of the situation being you're just at home in your own living room and something can just come out and get you. The fact that we can take an otherwise safe place like your house or like your it's your home base, right? We normally don't expect anything bad to happen to us at home. Hopefully, I hope you don't expect anything bad to happen to you at home. But the fact that a lot of horror takes place in otherwise very relatable scenarios and situations is really key to how it works. I mean, there's the opposite end of the spectrum, which is where you will get things like space horror, gothic horror, where it might be set in an elaborate, or like on a sailing ship in the 1800s, which would be something like The Terror, right? And that's not something relatable to almost any of us. Or it might be set on a space station or an asteroid, and their monsters might be aliens, and none of that's really relatable to us. But still within those movies, they do go out of their way to create this sensation of mundanity, because mundanity helps us build a baseline for like how things are supposed to be. So even in Alien, there's quite a few scenes at the beginning of Alien where we just watch the crew kind of like eating breakfast together and hanging out and just talking and going over their plans and just being themselves and just working on their space truck or ship or whatever, which sort of all establishes this baseline that we then can violate. Like, it's not aliens in the very first scene, in the very first moment, because then we wouldn't know what is to be violated if you don't build the sense of normality. Yeah, and also just that's the reason why way more horror takes place in regular situations with regular-ish people than it does in exotic, faraway situations or crazy, over-the-top scenarios. Both do exist, though, so like don't feel like you can't do either. But the less sense of broken and mundanity that you have, the more it starts to tip into something like action or maybe sci-fi or something else. So yeah, these are the main things that are scary in movies. Okay, so let's talk about horror logic. So a lot of the time, horror movies will have supernatural things happening in them. They don't all have to, and there's a subset of horror that is based on just somewhat realistic things. The first Halloween, for instance, is pretty much a realistic scenario where just a guy gets out of prison and comes to murder people in his hometown. I mean, in the later ones, he kind of recovers from 9 gunshots and does all these crazy things that I don't quite see as making as much sense anymore. But like, you can see how in most movies, in most horror films, the hook is the threat, and in most of them, the threat is going to be something beyond what we encounter every day. Because if it is more of a mundane thing that we encounter every day, then it's going to usually be the situation that makes that really key and interesting, and it's going to be more of a thriller. So horror logic is, we have to look at what makes something believable in a horror story or a fantasy story, because horror is using elements of fantasy here, isn't it? Our job is to have it add up and make sense and feel real. It's more important that it feel real, not on a scientific level, but on an emotional level. So let's ask this question: where do ghosts come from? Why doesn't everyone turn into a ghost? And every culture has different interpretations of how this works. But in your opinion, why does not everyone turn into a ghost?
This is not what I believe, but an explanation could be because everyone, when you die, either go to heaven or hell. But for some reason, some people turn into ghosts because they have unfinished business in this world or something.
Yeah, I think so. And a few people in the chat have said the same thing. But let me ask this: Is all unfinished business equal? Like, if you just hadn't done your laundry, would you come back as a ghost? That's unfinished business, right?
No, I mean like probably something more important, like they have to tell someone something or save someone or get revenge or something.
So important in the sense of emotion, right? Like emotionally important to that character. If they need to tell someone something, it's because they need to fulfill some emotional need in themselves. Or if they need to save someone, it's because they probably love that person, right? So
yeah,
this is like at the heart of, like, yes, you're correct that it is unfinished business, but it's not just any unfinished business, and it's not just everyone, because there has to be some really strong emotion sort of powering it, right? So like almost every culture has this rule, like, and every culture has some version of ghosts, and ghosts to me are my favorite fantastical. I don't actually believe in ghosts. No offense to anyone who does, of course, but like the reason that I think that they're probably my favorite fantasy creature is because, first of all, they're so versatile, and every culture has their own version of them and how they work, and there are specific rules and look and everything. I mean, look at this one. That's not exactly what we expect most ghosts to look like, probably. But they are one of the only supernatural creatures that if you never told kids about, they would just come up with on their own. Like, they just feel so true. It feels so real and so true that I know people who aren't religious who believe in ghosts, or people who say, I on a scientific level know that it's not possible, but I can't help believing in it. And like, that just kind of cuts so deeply to the heart of what it means to be human in so many ways. So that's kind of like why I think that ghost stories are so interesting and fascinating, and like there's so much here. There's so much in horror that is worthy of study and like tells us so much about who we are. but we can only really understand a lot of supernatural things through emotion, because we have a very high view of ourselves as a species, and we sort of believe our thought is kind of like, well, someone can't just be gone. Like, where do they go? Like, all that emotion, all that love, all that hate, anything, it has to go somewhere, right? So I think that's at the core of like a lot of religious beliefs in the world, but also just at the heart of how we understand folk tales and the idea of the supernatural in general. So why doesn't everyone turn into a ghost? Because not everyone has the emotional rationale for why they would. And you can come to understand a lot of this through ceremony, ritual, and rules. So if emotion is going to be at like one core pillar, one cornerstone of how we understand supernatural things to work, and by we I mean kind of like humanity writ large, because every religion, every culture, every people has their own way of understanding the supernatural. But in general, we usually think that ghosts are based on emotion, or supernatural things are largely based on our emotions, because we see our emotions as kind of transcending us and being more powerful than us, and like being something that could persist after we die. Like the love of a parent could cause them to come back after death is like something that doesn't make any actual scientific sense, but just feels real to us, because we're like, yes, the love of a parent could make someone do anything. You could fly with the love of a parent. You could shoot a laser out of your hand. You could come back from the dead and do something to save your kid. That's like something that everyone can understand and relate to, no matter what culture you're from. So ceremony, ritual, and rules. What is this here, and how does this work? Yaono says, Ouija board. Yes, this is a Ouija board. And how does this work? Yoshi says
You
a
hold.
ritual.
You,
Go ahead.
yeah, you hold the
Planchette?
I don't know.
It's called a planchette.
A planchette. Okay, you hold the planchette, and then you ask it a question, and then it moves on a letter and spells out something.
Is the planchette answering the question? Who's answering the question, though?
The spirit, the ghost, or
ghost.
whatever you're trying to connect to. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So it's a board by which you can contact deceased spirits.
Afterlife.
Yes, the afterlife. Right. Or some people think maybe demons or angels or something like that. Like maybe just some spectral entity of some kind. But most of the time, I think they're considered something that we can use to talk to the dead. This feels like something pretty ancient and pretty effective. I'm sure you guys, if you yourselves do not believe in these, I'm sure you know someone in your life who is quite freaked out by these, because a lot of people are, including people who are like, oh no, I'm a complete atheist, but I don't mess around. I know people who said, I'm an atheist, but I don't mess around with Ouija boards. They do a lot of tricks here to make you think this is a much older and much more established tradition than it really is. This is essentially a board game. This has been manufactured since the late 1800s. It's a variation, or it's like a patented version of what were called spirit boards, which were patented which were first developed during the late 1800s spiritualism craze, where I think partially due to leaps and bounds in scientific technology and just expanding thought in general, and expanding different schools of thought and fringe science and all these things, kind of making it feel like almost anything was possible. And people started to really experiment culturally, at least in the West, like in Europe and America, at least. I don't particularly know about the rest of the world in terms of this craze. I think different parts of the world have gone through this craze at different points in their histories, but people became very interested in speaking with the dead and with communicating with dead loved ones, or reaching out to speak to maybe even older historical figures or things like that, to get wisdom and guidance and figure out how to live our lives now. So these were invented, these were built they were designed. Many different versions of these exist. The Ouija board was the most popular one that was patented, and it's made by the same people that make Monopoly. It's not some ancient ritual. It's not something that has existed for thousands of years or for millennium. It's not from the Bible. It's not like they do a lot of psychological tricks to make you feel like it is older than it actually is. And a lot of tricks to make it feel more real. And there has to be something they're doing to make people that I have known in my life say, I'm an atheist, but I don't mess around with those. That means that the Ouija board has done something incredibly effective, or the marketing of, Parker Brothers, or is it Hasbro that makes it? It's one or the other that makes these. That have made it feel real to people on an emotional level. There's nothing scientific about this, but why are so many people weirded out by this? Why do so many people kind of feel like this could be real? Well, let's look at the rules. Remember how every Ouija board comes with a list of rules. Rule number 1, never play alone. Ooh. That sort of feels like it's there for a reason, doesn't it? Don't allow the board to count down through the numbers. Wow, okay, so by saying that sort of feels like maybe there's a danger of that happening, right? And if that were to happen, that would feel really unsettling and sinister. And, like, the fact that it's like, remember Amnesia? The low sanity doesn't actually almost do anything. It's all going to be in your mind of, like, what if that thing did happen? And you have planted, by saying something like, never allow the board to count through the numbers, has planted the seed in the mind of the audience that there is some kind of arcane rule set here that we're not necessarily privy to. And that this feels real because it feels like this is rules make us feel like things are more real because it feels like they are there for a reason. It feels like they, when we see rules around other things in our lives, we understand that they are there for a reason. If you see a sign on a fence that says, absolutely do not touch this fence, what do we assume about the fence?
It's electric.
Yeah, it's probably electric. Or, has razor wire on it or something. Like, there's some reason that it's there. Who would put a sign on a fence that said, absolutely do not touch, unless there was some very good, dangerous reason, right? So who would put a rule on a children's toy that you buy for $12 from Walmart that says never allow the board to count down the numbers? Oh, it kind of builds this anticipation in us and this expectation that perhaps that could occur and perhaps that has happened before. Always place a silver item on the board before playing. Never mention God. Always say goodbye. So all these things sum up to just ritual and ceremony make the unreal feel more real. It's why you can see, and this is not meant to sound derogatory towards anyone with spiritual practices, but you can see why every spiritual practice in the world has ritual and ceremony and rules. It's to get the people that they want to believe in this thing are more likely to continue to believe in it if they feel like that it is authentic in some kind of way. And the fact that there is ceremony around something just automatically makes it feel more authentic, because in our sort of tribal brain or tribal mindset, we're like, oh, okay, that ceremony exists because there is a long tradition there, because that thing is valid, because that thing has existed for a long time and I should respect that. So yeah, rules, ceremony, and ritual can almost always make things feel more real. And we have to think about different ways that we can apply that. So for instance, what about fairy tale rules or cultural fantasy? These are things that sort of, like, we're talking about The Ring a lot, which uses very strong sense of cultural and like this almost fairy tale logic in the fantasy and the framework of the world. So you can make the unreal feel more real with kind of this by tapping into certain cultural elements that people will be thinking of associated with the supernatural. So there's just certain similarities in fairy tales and horror stories. Often fairy tales are horror stories. They are pretty often examples of people overcoming terrifying enemies or supernatural threats, or of someone's vices causing them to be otherwise challenged or like tormented by the supernatural in a thematically appropriate way. And a lot of horror stories fall into similar categories with, higher levels of gore and nastier creatures and things like that. But there's similar elements in both fairy tales and horror in that they can touch on these hallmarks of cultural fantasy to make fake things feel more real, right? So what about things like the rule of 3 or the rule of 7? If, what's his name? In Scrooge, right, or in Christmas Carol, he says you're going to be visited by 3 ghosts, which sort of feels like, okay, that adds up and feels like something we could do in the runtime of this piece of fiction. But also it just feels sort of more like you can compare it to, what if you said you're going to be visited by 215 ghosts? We would start to feel like, okay, no, I'm not. I don't believe you that I'm going to be visited by 215 ghosts. Or what if I told you that every day at 5:30 p.m. you can look outside and you can see the dead? And we're going to write a whole story based on that idea. It's like, well, people can kind of do that anytime, and they can try that for themselves, and that doesn't feel very realistic. There aren't enough kind of rituals involved with that for that to feel authentic. But if I told you, in Appalachian folklore, if you peer through the hinge of a door at the stroke of midnight, then you can see someone who's died in the area. We start to be like, oh, okay, look through the hinge of a door at midnight. That starts to feel more authentic, because it's like there are certain kind of like, it feels like it's accessing this sort of cultural rule set or this arcane rule set that we may not necessarily have access to. Religious weaknesses, like crucifixes will hurt demons or vampires, or what about all the rules that are connected to vampires? The fact that you have to like invite them in is a very, it's based on cultural rules and politeness, and the fact that, vampires, if they are to represent this kind of seductive evil, or like people that will corrupt you in some kind of way, then you have to actually ask those people into your life, and it just sort of metaphorically feels like it makes sense. You have to allow the seducer into your life in order to be seduced. What else? We have things like promises and pacts. It feels like in a story, if a demon puts a curse on you and they make a pact that in 1 year they will come for your soul, as far as the story is concerned, that's going to happen. If that doesn't happen, then we'll be like, wait, so the promise and the pact that the demon made, he didn't fulfill it? It just feels like a very toothless, weak story element at that point. So, promises and pacts can feel like they're committing a supernatural being to some course of action. What else? Names and true names. Think of things like Rumpelstiltskin, or, you have to say his real name in order to defeat him or to get power over him, or the Babadook, or like Candyman, right? Candyman, you have to say, or Beetlejuice, say his name 3 times, or say his name 5 times, or Bloody Mary, you say their name in the mirror. Like, all these things, they sort of make it feel like they're like an access point to the supernatural for us. And they sort of allow us, they break down that barrier of saying, well, that's obviously not real. If you did a story about a ghost that drives to your house and has a shotgun and kicks open your door and shoots you, most people would say that sounds very silly, because we don't normally see ghosts driving cars or using guns. That's like a comedy. But if it's a ghost that you sort of invited into your life somehow through a sin, and then when you get home, the cross on the wall turns upside down, then people might start to understand, oh, okay, I've allowed the supernatural into my life because it's followed the rules that I expect it to, and it's used elements of like my cultural understanding of it in order to interact with this narrative. So yeah, you can use these things to make the unreal feel more real. Ritual, rules, ceremony, and cultural things that like we all have in the back of our minds. Think of like biblical references, think of fairy tale references, think of all these things that just are part of our shared cultural vocabulary that can be used to evoke fear with people. It doesn't actually take that much. If you go to your average, I called them boo houses when I was a kid. I guess they're called I guess they're just called haunted houses most of the time. Halloween haunted house, that kind of thing, where you just walk through like a maze and it's like supposed to be a haunted house, and then people jump out at you and scare you and stuff. Like, you can watch videos of people going through those. It doesn't take much to scare a person. Like, our survival instinct that we're always trying to hack and access to for its entertainment value is not a particularly difficult one to get to. You can put someone in a dark room and just like make a weird noise somewhere outside, and they might start getting freaked out. That's why like so much of what writing good horror is going to come down to the things around just those base plot elements. Like, a guy is trying to kill you will always be scary. A ghost is coming for your soul or your children's souls is always going to be scary, because that is just on a fundamental level. That survival instinct that we have says, I don't want that to happen to me or my family. And so the real skill of this is going to come down to making those things feel more real by setting consistent and like simple rules for them to follow. The rules shouldn't be way too complicated for the most part, unless it's like, I think that we understand that vampire lore, for instance, there's like 5 or 6 sort of separate rules, but that's just part of our cultural fantasy that I was talking about, so we don't really have to worry about explaining every single one in a movie, because I think we know how vampires work, right? You have to let them inside, they live forever, they have to drink blood, they get burned by sunlight, they don't like garlic, they get killed by crosses, running water, or a stake to the heart. So yeah, that's the basics. Anyway, so you get the idea that like we have certain things that are just built into the culture that you can access, you can pull from and use as your toolbox to make something scarier and make something feel more authentic to an audience. Alright, so I think that we might, not to mention, if we go through all of these slides, we might not be able to get to one of our activities, so let's just, do I have a slide for that? I guess maybe, we might go through some of these later slides in the rest of the class, because I have a bunch more to get to on monster design. the different sources of where monsters can come from, how to actually create the visual look of this monster and fill it in, starting with like just the silhouette, and then adding details, picking abilities and limitations and threat, personality and domains, and just like themes, things like that. So we will get to these things in the upcoming classes, but for the purposes of this one, I think we said we would have a time where the students will be able to pitch loglines. Was that right, Nacho? Or what was in the description? One second, let me just look up the class blurb to see what I promised everybody would be in the class. Sometimes these are evolving documents, and sometimes you go a little off track or off course, and you go on a tangent. What did I say we do today? Okay, monsters and villains. Right. Okay, so design a monster villain. So yeah, maybe we can look at just the basics of filling out a sketchbook and logline too. So let's go through some stuff before we get to more slides. Yeah, let's do some more of the bookkeeping for the class. So this is going to not take you through writing an entire movie, but basically planning an entire horror movie. So let's have a time to pitch student loglines, and I will go to my logline slide from a different presentation. Let's have some time to look at student ideas and help you workshop these and get them into shape for next week. And over the course of this class, you're going to be continuing to develop this idea, outlining it, plotting it, thinking of the high concept premise, developing the characters, and so that by the time it's over, you'll be basically ready to start that movie. Okay, so let's go to loglines. And this is going to be the basics of, and we're focused entirely on movies for this course, by the way. We're not doing horror and thriller TV shows, so just pitch movie ideas here. But so, what is a logline? This is the one-sentence expression of the idea. It's the story boiled down to just one sentence or two. It's going to imply a visual action and usually to give us a sense of the inciting incident and the protagonist. What do they want? What's in their way? What happens if they fail? So what is the stakes or ticking clock? Does somebody have a question?
Is your video loading, or you don't have anything on it right now? Because it's like I don't see you.
Oh, I think it's up. Can everybody else see me?
Yeah, I can see you.
Looks okay to me. I had the same issue a little while ago. I had to close out of Discord and log back in. I had to click back on the link. Yeah.
Okay.
No problem. Yep, it might just be a connection issue on your end, so just disconnect and reconnect, and it might fix itself. So, let's go over the basics of loglines. So while I'm going over this, you should just be writing out whatever you have for your logline. And we can also create a sketchbook, which is going to be just a blank Google document for you to put all your unsorted ideas. I would actually recommend you just start to work on your logline in that. So go to Google Drive, and hang on, do I have a slide just tells you what to do there? I think I do somewhere. But just go to Google Drive, make a new document that's called, the title of the movie, Sketchbook. Or if you don't have a title yet, you can just call it Sketchbook. And on that one, you're going to just be including all of your unsorted ideas. There's no real wrong or right things to include in this. This is just going to be a place for you to flesh out characters and themes and figure out what your logline is going to be, brainstorm endings and dialogue or research material, or you can include links or pictures or videos or anything else that inspires your writing. You can go to Google Drive, just call it Sketchbook at the top, and just include your title, genre, logline, and comps. Comps would be those movies that you're going to compare yours to. If it's like Ready or Not meets the Royal Tenenbaums, then you have to just include those. Just try to pick two. Don't include more than two comps. Ready or Not meets the Royal Tenenbaums. That'd be kind of good, wouldn't it? Maybe like a Wes Anderson slasher movie. Okay, so let's look at logline rules and just a little template for this. So we want to know the protagonist. Who is the main character? What do they want? What's in their way? What happens if they fail? Since it's horror or thriller, remember horror is going to be more based around the threat, the specificity of the threat. Thriller is going to be more about the situation that the protagonist is in. Here's a template you can use if you're not sure where else to start. When or after inciting incident, so the event that kicks the story in motion, an adjective protagonist must conflict before or in order to stakes or ticking clock. So this would be when a let's use an example of like Evil Dead. Let's use Evil Dead for our first one. So we're gonna, and how are we gonna describe Ash? Let's call him like, I forget exactly what he's like in the first movie. He's sort of a jock, isn't he? Or he's kind of a meat-headed college guy, I believe. So if we say when a meat-headed college student accidentally stumbles across an ancient book in the woods while his friends are partying at a remote cabin, he unleashes ancient demons and must, fight them off to survive until dawn. So that would be the main character. Inciting incident, he finds the recording of the book, or he finds the evil book that causes the demons to show up. An adjective protagonist, a meat-headed college guy, must conflict, fight off demons, and save his and his friends' lives. In order to, stakes are ticking clock, survive, and ticking clock is until dawn. So that's one sentence that answers all of these questions. It should make it clear that there is an audience for the story, because it's about, interesting stakes like life or death if this is horror, perhaps, love, friendship, revenge. The size of the story should be really clear, especially if it's a thriller. We should get a sense of the walls or boundaries, so it should not feel too big, like it's going to be better suited for a TV show or a miniseries. A thriller should feel like we understand the exact time frame that it's going to be taking place across, whether it's all in one night, or maybe it's all in maybe it's in real time, maybe it's over the course of a week, maybe it's, just find the boundaries. Okay, let's look at some log lines for our last 20 minutes here. So we have one from Maria, one from Carmen. Thanks, guys. And you can continue to add yours for now. And when we get to them, I'm going to call on you and have you read it out loud. And then we will answer questions about it. And then, depending on how many we get to, we might be able to do just a couple slides on designing the threat or designing the monster. This will be something we'll cover more in the rest of the course. We'll do just like a slide or two on it before the end of class. All right, let's look at Maria. How does your garden grow? Is this horror or is this thriller here?
It's horror.
It's horror. Great. Okay, so can you read out the logline for us?
After creditors threatened to throw her and her grandmother out of her house, a recent college graduate with a degree in botany must survive working at a hotel run by a mad doctor with an obsession with rare plants.
Okay, after creditors threatened to throw her and her grandmother out of her house, a recent college graduate with a degree in botany must survive working at a hotel run by a mad doctor with an obsession with rare plants. Okay, there's some interesting elements here. I'm not quite seeing what the threat is, though. What danger is the main character in?
Some of the doctor's specimens are dangerous, as in man-eating plants.
So the doctor is going to try to kill our main character with man-eating plants? Why?
She is a little too curious for her own good.
Oh, so she stumbles on his specimens?
Yes.
Okay. I think then in that case, you framed it here as she has to survive working at a hotel, but the fact that she's working there becomes irrelevant as soon as she stumbles across carnivorous plants, and now I think you're saying her boss is trying to kill her?
Yeah.
Or is she trapped in the building, or like where does most of the movie take place?
In the hotel.
It does. Okay, so is this like she finds the plants at like 20 minutes in, and the rest of the time is the rest of the movie is like in real time as she's trying to get out of the building, or like how does it work exactly? Maybe it's too early for you to say. That's okay if you haven't outlined it far enough yet.
It's still in the planning phases.
That's okay. Okay, but so if this is gonna have that really strong element of, because it sounds like if your villain is in charge of this building, and this is sort of his domain, right? Then we would probably assume once she gets out of that, then the movie's over. I would think, because why would she go back to the evil plant hotel? So to me, that sounds like you should be framing this a little more about she has to now escape from the hotel and avoid being killed by these carnivorous plants. So the inciting incident is more like when at her new job she discovers that her boss is a killer plant guy. She now has to escape the building before they find and eat her. Make sense?
Yeah, that sounds a lot better than what I had.
So the first sentence, creditors threatening her to throw her and her grandmother out of her house. That's kind of like the setup for the setup. So we don't really need to include that. The real inciting incident is the thing that shows the threat to us, or like unveils the monster to us. So frame it more like that. It's when she discovers that her boss is keeping carnivorous plants, she has to escape, kill him, whatever the goal is for her to get away from that. Make sense?
Yeah.
Any questions?
I'm typing out a new log line.
Okay, sure. Can work on a new log line. Thanks for this, Maria. So let me do.
You're welcome.
Before we do, we have time for one or two more probably, and we'll have throughout the rest of this course. So if you want to have more time to do this, please sign up. Remember, you can sign up at scriptcamp.net. Please do so by next class, and you can get a free trial for 2 weeks. That's 4 classes at least. Or actually, it's way more because we have 2 weekday classes. We have 3 boot camps over the weekends usually, so you could go to 10 classes for free. It's like 20 hours. Let's look at designing your monster. Just a quick overview of it. So, like, for instance, we just had a doctor who is obsessed with making carnivorous plants. So we have to kind of outline what first of all, just the look of that character is. And a good way to start with that is just the basic silhouette. So think of how do they walk or hold themselves. Or a lot of the time you can make a character, especially a monster, more unsettling by altering some element of the basic silhouette. And when you consider that most often the things that children will displace when you ask a child to draw a monster will be the eyes or the mouth. Eyes are the most common thing. So just think of the basic placement of their different features to create the most unsettling possible effect that makes sense for their theme and who they are. We have to look at their abilities and limitations too, because that's going to be key components in what they can do, and the types of scenes in which your heroes are safe, and scenes in which they are not safe. And having this sense of limitation is actually really important, because if we look at this sort of like a general rule of writing magic in any medium, limitations are more important than powers. Because the limitations of a ghoul are often more interesting than its capabilities and can make it feel more real, because the real things just have limitations. There's nothing that can just kind of get you anywhere. So, there are some exceptions to that. Like in Evil Dead, I'm not actually quite sure how the magic works or the limitations work. A lot of franchises really actually kind of suffer for not having clear enough limitations on their monster. So, for instance, this plant guy, we might want to say, within the building that he is in, he has a tablet that he can press buttons on it that can activate spores in different rooms that can cause the plants to change mood. So he has one that will enrage the plants. He has one that will calm them down. He has one that will make them root into the ground. He has one that will make them uproot and crawl around on the walls. He can control the plants in different rooms via this tablet. So now we understand, as long as he has that tablet, he's sort of in power here. Within his domain, we understand that we are at the villain's mercy. So sequences in which the characters are out of the villain's domain can actually build more tension. Think of, Freddy Krueger can only get you in your dreams, right? So when the characters are out of their dreams, they know they're safe, but having those moments of safety increases the tension because it allows our minds to kind of wander. What is the villain capable of when they are in their domain, or when they don't have that limitation applied to them? So again, your audience's mind is going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting in what these characters are capable of sometimes. And the limitations are going to force your villains to be more insidious and more clever. And when properly seated, they can just make your character feel more real and more powerful and more threatening rather than less, especially when we're in that character's domain. So, the Diana from Lights Out can only get you in the dark. So when we're in the dark, we're extra scared. This guy from Don't Breathe he's blind. So when we're trapped in a house with him, we have to be super quiet because we know his hearing is amazing. Same as these guys from The Quiet Place. Limitations are going to be a big component that will make your characters feel more authentic and real and frightening. So if we say the Mad Plant Doctor only has the power to control the plants within his apartment, then when your character is in his domain, they will feel more vulnerable and more at threat, more at risk. Okay, so that's just some things to think about when designing your villains. Also, in other classes, we'll get into things more like personality and sympathy or rationality, which is going to be more applicable in thriller for the most part, because a lot of the time horror villains will thrive on an element of mystery or inscrutability, whereas thriller villains they'll function better with a sense of rationality, even if it's a somewhat unhinged philosophical point of view. Think of like, the Kevin Spacey's villain from Seven. He's this serial killer that is killing people in accordance with the 7 deadly sins because he's making some kind of ideological point about the world and about society. So thriller villains more often will have this sense of rational behavior to their actions, even if it's crazy. And horror villains will benefit more usually from having mystery and inscrutability to why they're doing what they're doing. I mean, why is Cthulhu going to destroy the world? Because something, I don't know, because some ancient edict or from some prophecy or something like that. Why does Michael Myers kill people? I don't know, because he's just evil, because some people are just like that. Why do the strangers murder people? Because they just do. So yeah, horror villains don't need full explanations and full rational motivations and things like that, and sometimes it can be better if they don't have them. Okay, let's do 1 or 2 more log lines. Let's look at... let me scroll up here. Let's do... let's do Yoshi with Is This Me? Can you read this out for us, Yoshi?
Okay, so my log place is a girl just living his life until a week before her 17th birthday. She start feeling like someone is following him, and this person keep appearing everywhere, like in his dream, in her dream, in her daily life, and day by day, this person starts showing its face, and turns out it's her twin who died because her parent is loving her more than her other twins. I just got inspiration.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I'm gonna paste it out here just so we can see it on our drive window and read it out. So a girl living his... so there's some pronoun confusion in this. The fact that, is it a girl or is it a boy? I mean, we say it's a girl living his life. You mean her life, right?
It's a girl. Sorry, English is not my
That's okay.
first language.
So a girl's living her life. Okay, so in a logline, we don't need to include the sort of like normal world section. So we would assume that your main character is just living their life until something happens. But I think you're saying, is her birthday is that what causes this to begin? Is it like the fact that she's turning 17 that is causing this stalking to happen?
She's turning 17.
It is because of that?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So we will want to describe it in terms of you need to describe your main character with an adjective of some kind. So we might want to say something like, on her 17th birthday, an adjective, teenager. Maybe we could say, discovers that someone is stalking her. And it looks like you're saying that's some kind of faceless entity. So she discovers a faceless entity is stalking her. Or let's say the faceless ghost of her dead twin, because that's what it really is. And we have to kind of just be really straightforward and say exactly what the story is in a logline. Her dead twin is stalking her, and now she must do what? So we would say, and now must do blank thing. So what's the conflict? Figure out what specific thing she needs to do to defeat this ghost. Does she have to team up with an exorcist to get rid of it? Or does she have to complete a ritual? Or just find the specific goal for her? Before stakes. So the stakes are usually going to be life and death, but maybe it wants to possess her, or maybe it wants to... just be more specific with what it's going to actually do. This also sounds a lot like Malignant. So I would look up that movie if you haven't already seen that from a year or two ago. It's pretty crazy. So maybe yours is not similar in the story-wise, but just like the very basics of this. It's like your old twin coming back to get you, stalking you as a kind of spirit or monster. So yeah, hopefully that'll give you some pointers there. Just be a little more specific. Describe your main character in more detail, and give us a goal that we can understand. That'll be what the character has to do, this really clear thing before the movie's over. This is what she has to do to defeat the ghost.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, we got time for one more. What was that one called again? Is That Me? I like the title. Let's do one more. So, let's see. We had... I have a bunch. I love that the students and the boot campers are participating in this one. I think I'm just going to pick one from someone who's not a boot camper, though, so that we can focus. We'll have lots of time to do the boot campers log lines in the next class and in the subsequent 3 classes. Again, sign up if you haven't already signed up. So I'm going to pick someone else who is not already signed up. Scream. Let's do Umbra. Are you here, Scream?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. Can you read this out for us?
All right. In a dystopian future, a traveler is saved by an over-helpful couple and must prevent his curse from transferring to them. But when the couple won't allow him to leave their home, he decides to give in and allow his curse to free him.
Okay, let me make sure I understand this. This is a horror, but it's set in a dystopian future. So is this sci-fi as well?
The dystopian future is more like it focuses around the element that it has this global warming idea where sandstorms are happening. So it's like 30 years in the future and sandstorms are kind of taking over.
Taking over as in there's no society left?
There's civilization, but it's like a wasteland kind of thing, and
it's a wasteland.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is in fact sci-fi then. If we're going so far as to say the world is not recognizable.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So in a dystopian future, a traveler is saved by an over-helpful couple and must prevent his curse from transferring to them. But when the couple won't allow him to leave their home, he decides to give in and allow his curse to free him. It's raising some interesting questions for me. It's not very clear. What does the curse do?
So the curse is the supernatural entity that if you talk about it, it kills basically everyone in the room and picks another person. At the same time, it leaves that cursed individual immortal. And so these sandstorms, they tear people up and you can't survive unless you're in shelter. So he's actually traveling through the sandstorms and he can regenerate. He's immortal through all this. It's just kind of this weird dynamic where this couple actually ends up being cannibals too. And so this is like an immortal meal ticket for them. This guy that walks into they say this guy falls off a cliff, the couple saves him, and they take like some limbs secretly, like they take his leg because he fell. I mean, they treated him and like, oh, he'll be fine, he'll break the fever. And once one night goes by and you see you see like his leg regenerate, or you see they're like, how the hell did you get your leg back? And I mean, it just spirals from there.
So why is none of this is mentioned in the logline though? That's like this sounds like a completely different movie from the one that you were suggesting. This doesn't even really sound like horror anymore. If your main character is going to be a regenerating immortal, first of all.
Go
ahead.
So it plays on I'm playing on the elements of horror, and I'm focusing on the story of the creature.
What creature?
The supernatural curse, the creature that is the curse. I'm focusing on that creature.
But it's a creature that just makes a guy immortal and also will kill anyone in the room if someone mentions it?
Yes. So it's the beginning of the story. I do like I guess a save the cat kind of thing where you show the beginning of the creature and how it became kind of, I don't know if you're familiar with Elfen Lied, but it's like it's like an anime where the creature, the enemy comes from like a factory kind of thing, a military thing, and it's like a weaponized supernatural creature, and it gets out because someone takes over. Go on.
Oh, I was saying yes, I'm understanding. Okay, so the creature comes from like a factory accident or something? Or it's like
something like that. Yeah.
Bioengineered or kind of thing. Yep, okay.
Mhm. I mean, I get what you're saying though. Like none of that's in the story. It sounds like So I'm trying to keep the logline ambiguous, but also the main beats.
Should
if
not
that
be
makes
keeping
sense.
the logline should not be ambiguous.
Yeah, no,
This is like it's like a handshake between you and somebody who you're trying to get to read the thing that you have presented to them. It's not like the back of a book where you're trying to just like tease people as to some kinds of things that might be in the story. You have to directly just say what this is about and what the hook is. If the hook is this is about in the future, a guy with immortal regeneration powers is kidnapped by a psychopathic couple that wants to use him as a food source. Is that the hook of the it sounds like that there's a really compelling movie there, but then you're adding all this stuff about there's also a curse that's also a monster that also will kill everyone that has like magic of its own. It's just starting to feel like there's way too much going on in what otherwise could be a very simple story. This is starting to sound more like a sci-fi drama than like this doesn't even sound like horror after a certain point. So I would maybe either try to simplify if you were trying to do a horror movie, you need to simplify the scope and the amount of rules going on and the amount of things happening. I mean, guy who regenerates his flesh is being held captive for food by crazy couple. I think that's a great setup for a horror movie. I think maybe guy is trying to stop whatever curse is afflicting him from affecting this couple that is keeping him. Perhaps that could be an effective movie as well. If they were actually nice, but in that case, like, if we're gonna have trouble understanding horror if your main character is first of all not vulnerable in the situation. Like, there's almost no horror movie where the main character can't die or can't be hurt. I can't even name one, except for now I'm thinking.
Sounds like it's never been done, right?
Well, except in ones where the protagonist is a ghost, like, like Sixth Sense or the others or something like that. But there's a reason that it's never done. It's like some things if they've never been done before, you have to look at. You have to ask like why hasn't it ever been done, and if there's no tension if he can't actually be killed. So I would maybe either think about simplifying the story, or maybe don't think of it as a horror movie. Maybe think of this as like a bigger sci-fi adventure, or maybe, I don't know, if they're traveling a lot, then it might even be sci-fi adventure or sci-fi epic or something like that. If it's mostly just going to be people talking in a house, then maybe it's just a sci-fi drama with like thriller elements or something along those lines. But this doesn't really feel like it has remember I was saying earlier, in horror, the hook is the threat. What's the threat in this?
The threat is transferring the curse. This guy is a martyr, and he is accepted his he's accepted his fate as he's taken the burden that he's going to live this immortal life, and the threat is releasing this horror back into the civilization.
But he's trapped by a pair of cannibals, so
yeah, so it's like there's a double threat. I mean, it's not really a threat because he's immortal. It's just like it's ridiculous. It's overcomplicated and ridiculous.
So you see the confusion comes when you're like, it's a double threat, but one of them's not really a threat. But that's the horror just needs to have one clear, like, what's the threat in the Scream movies? Oh, it's a killer that is murdering all the main characters' friends, right? Like, it's just the simpler you can get, the more effective it will be. The more we have to explain rules and world building and the state of the world after these weather events, and the fact that this character is a genetic experiment, like, it starts to feel more like anime and less like a self-contained theatrical 90-minute horror film.
I understand.
So yeah, there's interesting stuff here, and this I could see like 2 or 3 cool and interesting genre movies in just the ingredients that you have. So maybe in outlining, just try to either simplify what you have, or just lean into the fact that you're doing a much bigger scale story.
Yeah, for sure. It's very helpful.
Can I give you a suggestion?
Absolutely, please.
Because I'm loving this story. I just kind of saw it in my brain. I'm like, this is festive. So, I see that the guy, he has the curse, right? And of course, he wants to be the martyr and holds the curse to himself. I'm saying that he's been walking around for thousands of years, but the curse only lasts for 3,000 years or 1,000 years or so. So it's like he has 3 days left, and the curse would end with him, after the 3 days. But the elements of the curse can be released to someone else if he speaks of it to someone. But he's being tortured by these people, and he is like struggling not to, you know, release the curse on them. Like he's struggling not to release the curse on them because he's like this martyr person. But you know, maybe that can be like one of the things. And I also was thinking about like he gets devoured by the creature every night or something like that, and then regenerates.
Could be
And
cool.
that's how he, yeah, like that's how he regenerates by getting devoured by the creature.
I like the timeline idea that you have.
Thanks, Lazima. Yeah, maybe including some kind of time frame or time-based rules on the curse could add a bit of urgency or tension by saying like it's about to end or it's about to change or mutate or something like that. So, yep, some good stuff to think about. Thanks for that. We do have to call class because we're past our time, but we have a bunch of interesting things coming up in Script Camp. First of all, you should sign up for Script Camp if you've not. So Nacho's just posted a little image that you can click the checkmark emoji underneath that if you plan to sign up, and you get automatic access to all of our chat channels, video library, and videos of all the other classes. We are going to, by the end of this 4-week boot camp, we're going to have detailed outlines that you'll be ready to begin writing your horror thriller feature or TV pilot at the end of this. I'm mostly going to be focusing on features, but if you really want to write a pilot, you can do that as well. So thanks so much for coming, everybody. Please sign up if you're interested. And remember, we have table reads on Sunday, 2 p.m. Everybody can submit up to 5 pages to submit a feature. You can pay 100 script coins. Coins are our little server currency. They're like the Chuck E. Cheese tokens you get from winning the Whack-A-Mole, but you just get them by giving feedback and participating in classes and activities. You can use them to buy little bits of merch like shirts and mouse pads and stuff, or you can use them to get membership and table reads. We have TV Pilot Bootcamp coming up tomorrow. That is tomorrow, right? Today is the 22nd. Okay, so this will be our
Yes,
right,
tomorrow. Week
okay.
It's week 2 tomorrow.
Week 2. Okay, so yeah, TV Pilot Bootcamp just started. So if you want to write a TV pilot, I would recommend joining no later than tomorrow, just so you don't fall too far behind. It's a 6-week class, so you'll be coming into week 2 of 6, so you'll be just a little behind, but it's still totally feasible to join a boot camp in progress. Here's stuff that's coming up. We have Wednesday, Thursday classes, 5 to 7 o'clock. Feature boot camp is Fridays from 4 to 6. We are going into week 6 of our current one, so in just a couple weeks we'll have a new one getting going. It'll get started at June 11th, just as at the end of this horror camp. So if you follow the horror thriller camp all the way through, you'll have a script ready to start. Rewrite boot camp next one starts June 18th. Saturdays 12 to 2. Writer's Lab is like office hours every Saturday 4 to 6 Pacific. You can come in with whatever questions you have, or up to 5 pages of a script, or outline and get just my feedback on whatever's working on the page. Upcoming classes, here's a bunch of sample topics. We have Where the Story Begins. This is the beginning of the movie. Outlining, exposition, action, dialogue, endings, scene work, characters, and then words on paper, parts 1 and 2. That's what we got going on at Script Camp. We'll stop and take any last questions here, but we'll bid you all have a good weekend, and thanks for coming. Hope that you've all gotten some good inspiration for your horror or thriller movie, and that you are going to sign up and finish that first draft. Maybe you've never written a script before, maybe this is kind of new to you, or maybe you have some experience, but regardless, Script Camp is just going to be there to give you that boost and keep you accountable and help you finish script after script after script to just improve at this and get better and better. It's like going to the gym, to put yourself on the road to becoming a professional writer. So I'll take any last questions, then we'll call class. Questions now. Questions now. Does anyone have any questions right now? So you can feel free to unmute or just ask in the chat. And if you want to head out for today, then you are dismissed as well, so thank you for coming by. For our next class, if you want to continue with the horror movie, just refine your logline based on the feedback that you got today, if you got some. And if not, then you can attend many other events in the server, or just post in our chat channels to get more feedback on that logline. Seems like no one has any questions, so we will call it for now. Thanks so much for coming, folks. Have a great rest of your weekend. We hope to see you soon.